Yeah? So you guys all ordered from the state nursery? No? So I brought, it's kind of late to order trees, but I brought this, you guys ordered from the state nursery?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. So this is an order form. You good? And it gives you kind of a price range of what it costs. Okay. Yeah, it's gonna cost to order trees from the state nursery. You don't have to order from the state nursery. There are tons of private nurseries. But it just gives you an idea. You can compare it to the private nurseries if you do decide to plant trees.
Just trying to find one more thing and then I will be
Okay.
good to go. Oops.
So, yeah, Laura's gonna talk about mainly, things to think about before planting trees, planting. And then when she gets through all that kind of stuff, then I go into the more specifics on tree planting, the things to think about. Actuality, I was talking to my predecessor, I don't know if anyone knows, Dennis Waterman, he was a forester, he retired in 2002. And we were sitting around in the vehicle, we were actually talking about tree planting today. And we had another landowner there and his pros and cons of what he did in the past, and came up some memories of, I'm gonna bring up during my presentation to watch out for, something that failed for him, and I never even thought about that. So, yeah, you ready?
Sure.
All right.
Apologize for that. Technology is great when it works and when I work at the same time. Hi, I'm Lauren Larson. I'm an extension educator out of Eau Claire County, but I cover the northwestern quarter of the state. So, sure. How about this?
That's that.
All right. So before we get started, just a couple of quick questions for you all. I'm wondering, with a show of hands, who here heard about these classes through a postcard or something in the mail? Okay, and for those of you who heard about it outside of a postcard, something in the mail, or someone in this room, can you let us know how you heard about this?
Facebook ad.
Okay.
The emailing that the county puts out.
Okay, Jeanette, can
Open
you,
Donors Forum or something.
the county email? Okay, thank you. Couple last quick things. This is being recorded. Unfortunately, we have the beginning kerfuffle recorded, but this will be available to you to view afterwards, and I will send you the link to that in a follow-up email. So if you want to go ahead.
Okay, which button do I push? Just make sure I don't mess it up.
Should be.
This one?
Yeah.
Oh,
A few of the things that we would like you to walk away with tonight is to know how to plan, to plant trees, know the proper techniques, know how to maintain what you plant, and to know what resources are available to you.
Grandma.
So a few reasons that folks plant trees. The big one is to attract wildlife, start a new forest, put in some edges around an existing field, underplanting, so filling in areas, replanting, and to create shelter, either for fields or for wildlife. Some of the steps to go through before you actually begin planting is to first start by setting goals, and at least think about the goals you have. Second is to do a site evaluation, and that's something that Jeanette or a consultant forester can help you with. Also species selection, looking at what is best or the combination of species that are best to grow on your land, another thing that Jeanette can help you with. Planting design, so coming up with a map of your plan, thinking of where you would like to do these plantings and coming up with the design that you want. And the last thing is looking at stock selection. I'll go through each of these. What are your goals for your land? A couple of examples that we've heard pretty regularly are to improve aesthetics, include or increase the diversity or health of the forest, add cover and food for wildlife, produce timber to make money out in the long run, control erosion or create windbreaks on those parcels that have old fields and forests. When thinking about setting goals, you want to be specific. So coming up with not only your goals, but looking at what tree species and what your site conditions are and how those will play into the goals that you set. So for example, let's just look at the first one. If you're interested in wildlife, a couple things you want to think about are what habitat that wildlife actually needs. So how much space do they need? What do they need to keep them there across the season as far as food, cover, and shelter? And don't just consider trees. Well, because often when you are planting, those will come up on their own. So think about those as something that, in the specifics of looking at wildlife as a goal. Go ahead. Some things that Jeanette can go through with you in a site evaluation are climate, which we probably all know what our climate is. But soils can tell you exactly what soils you have. You can also do a soil test, I believe, through the county extension office. You can look up what soil type you have on the, is it USDA site that does that? The soil viewer?
Yeah, or I have a soils book. Yeah,
Okay,
I can give you, if you guys want to know, I can give you the exact website to go to.
yeah, so a couple ways to find out what soils you have. That plays into what will be able to grow and what is already growing. Competing vegetation, so the naturally occurring vegetation as well as the ones that come in and are invasive, unfortunately. Thinking about what's competing on your land will help you think about what is the best to plant and the way to plant it. Things like topography, so slope, which way a forest faces or a space that you're intending to plant can also impact the way that trees grow, and certain species like different sides of a hill or flat ground. Productivity, we'll get a little bit more into that when Jeanette is talking later in the presentation. And then something to consider too is insects, disease, and animals. So if you have not or are interested in learning more about insects and disease, every area of the state has a forest health specialist, similar to Jeanette's position, where they can come out, check out your woods, see if there are any of these insects or disease, and tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly of it, how to manage it. And that is a free resource available to you as well. Climate, I'm not going to talk too much about this. I think we mostly all probably know what climate we live in up here, but just wanted to show you, these two images show two different species and the areas in which they grow. So many of the species in the state of Wisconsin are cut off between north and south. So obviously we would be looking more at the northern species. And something that you could also do if you're interested in having that more in-depth information, pictures, that kind of thing, look for a Wisconsin or a Midwestern tree ID book. That will give you each species with maps of where they grow, but a lot more information on the species itself. And that could help you decide what it is that you're interested in planting. Because I think the list is pretty extensive of what you can order, and it can be a little overwhelming. So a great place to start.
There.
Soils, so.
There now.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Trying to get you on.
Oh, okay, sorry. So there is a range in soils, as we talked about. There's different ways for you to find out. If you don't know what type of soil you have, find it out. It's useful information to figure out what will grow. What type of soil you have will influence the way that water and nutrients are absorbed or moved through the landscape. And again, you can do a soil test if you want to know more specifics. And that little interruption reminded me that I forgot to mention, if you have questions, please feel free at any time to tap or to push this button and use the microphone to ask. So you don't have to wait until the end. If you have something you want to ask, go ahead and jump in at any time. Mentioned that. Here we go. Mentioned this before, topography is something that will impact the way that trees grow, the species that grow. So things to consider when you're looking through a tree ID book or a nursery order form. Think about where it is that it's going and how these three things: elevation, slope, and aspect, how much you influence it. Again, Jeanette can talk through this with you if you have specific questions. Productivity is the measure of a land's ability to grow a given product. And this changes by species, this changes with soil type, it changes with all of the things that we've already talked about. And yet again, the bottom line here, if you leave with one thing tonight, is that Jeanette can help you figure these things out. Competition. What plants or other tree species are present that may compete with the trees you are planting? So I'm not sure if I don't believe we talk about dominant species, subdominant species, but there are species that directly compete with each other and species that do not directly compete with each other based on sunlight and other requirements of the tree. So this is something to consider, something that you can look up or ask Jeanette. And then another aspect of competition is, again, those things that we don't necessarily want in our property, but might be there, insects, diseases, and animals that may affect the trees that you are planting. So one of the big ones that I think is probably pretty common here would be deer or oak. It's hard to plant, it's hard to keep it going. Things to consider if you're going to be planting that, how will those animals, diseases, and insects be trying to stop the production of what you're doing? Just things to be thinking about before you actually get to tree planting. So I think that's last of mine. Now we'll get into, oh no, sorry. One of the last steps, before you get to planting, think about a planting design. Plant only what you can maintain, because tree planting is not only the planting, but there's a process afterwards of keeping an eye on things, keeping the things away from the trees. And you want to have realistic goals and realistic ideas of what it is that you can make. Develop a map. This is something that we have a worksheet if you're interested, but really it's just come up with a cartoon drawing of your land. Take a sheet of paper. Here are these species. Here's what I'm planning to do in these areas. Here's what I want to plant. That will help you get an idea of how to arrange the species, how many you need, spacing, that kind of thing. And actually, probably the most important is roads and access, so how to actually get to where you're going to plant. A lot of times what we hear is that there are places that we want to go, but because of the hills and the slope of the land, it's challenging to get to. So again, all things to be thinking about before you actually start your tree planting project. This is an example of my cartoon map here, and it should not say productivity at the top, it should say map activity. I apologize for that. Just an example of how to create a visual for yourself to think through the ways that you could plan, what's actually feasible, and then come up with some numbers of what you would like to order, think of a timeline, that kind of things. This link, I can send to you in an email. It is a way to come up with a tree planting plan on your own. And I believe if you submit one, the forester will follow up with you.
I don't know how that works, but I did bring, if you want to pass this out, I didn't make tons of copies. You can just look it over. They're just different types of tree planting plans I've done throughout the years. Ones that have air photos, you can tell some are older before we had these GIS systems. And then you can pass it around, let people see them. So these are just some sample tree planting plans I create. I can do that for you, not that hard. And they're just different types of, actually, if you can look at all of them, there's different types of plans on there with different cover types. One guy will cover, but it just shows you some of the stuff I put on there. Some of them have air photos, some of them. And so now the new maps that I create have the air photo on there, and I can figure out exactly how many acres you want to plant. So that helps. So it just gives you an idea, and you can just pass those around and just look at them.
Is there a tree that you recommend? Like, I'm always trying to think of, we're dealing with oak wilt right now. Before that, I always thought an ash tree was kind of disease resistant, and then we had the ash borers. You've got elm disease, Dutch elm disease, I mean, you guys know all the diseases. Is there a tree in Wisconsin that is kind of resistant to anything, or is the basswood, is that be the only one, or? I mean, I honestly don't know. It's like everything seems to have,
Well, I
You're getting
would,
hit
I,
lately.
you know, even with oak wilt, I still tell people to plant oak.
okay,
Hey,
If you,
can you turn the microphone on?
oh, sure.
Thank you.
Even with oak wilt in the area, I still tell landowners to plant oak if we can. If they wanna go the whole route of putting a fence up to keep the deer away, things like that. The one tree I don't recommend planting, obviously, is the ash. That is unfortunately not gonna be a survivable species for the future. At least as of now, unless something majorly changes. But that's what we see from, Michigan. I would stick with native. If you have a lot of deer, typically spruce and, possibly, I like white pine. The deer like to eat that, and we'll talk about that 2 different ways. I'll get to that point of what we could do to prevent some of those issues.
okay,
So, my biggest thing is the tree order from the state nursery. They only sell native trees.
okay,
There is one native tree, a non-native tree that I have recommended throughout my many years that has done very good in the area, and that's a Norway spruce. It's kind of a droopy tree, sad looking tree. I think it's kind of a neat looking tree, but it's kind of sad. That's what I call it. And that does very well. It's one of the fastest growing spruce. So a white spruce, when you plant trees, sometimes if you're doing a windbreak, you want to start with a tree that starts slow, and then the ones in the fast are in the middle, so you kind of get this transition.
yes,
So if you wanted a fast growing spruce, Norway spruce is one of them. White spruce is slower, so you put that on the outer edge.
okay,
So
okay,
there's
thank you.
something.
I think the next ones are actually species. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah.
a little more?
Yeah, I don't remember any of these slides, but yeah, we can do that. So the species, this obviously shows walnut. I don't recommend planting walnut. There actually is a plantation just north of Barron. Don't know how old that one is, but it's pretty old and hasn't changed. I live in southern Polk County, and my neighbor to the north has black walnut, and they're still this size. And they were planted 30 years ago. So they just don't grow. Theory is if you start mowing the grass, kill the grass, that might get them to grow faster. They grow great in a yard, but in a forest setting, not here. So pick species that, like I just said, that are native to this area.
Yes.
Yeah, conifers, sandy soil. Someone had a question? Oh. Okay, sandy soils, you know, red pine. I've noticed that in Barron County, the red pine in fertile soil does great for about 30 years. And then they start to decline. And that's what's happening up in a lot of areas, that they were planted in just maybe too fertile soil. I mean, they do great in that kind of soil, but then they hit a certain time frame and then they decline. So you gotta keep that in mind. White pine, deer like to eat that, especially planted ones. Jack pine likes sandy soil. So we have some jack pine, native jack pine in southern Barron County, but it's not very prevalent in Barron County. Northwest corner of Polk County has a good amount of jack pine. It is a nice species, but I don't really recommend it. It's a scrubby type pine. I would probably stay away from that. I would stick to red pine. If you want to get something growing, it can be a spacer. So then when you thin out the white pine and you're gonna leave the white pine, you take the red pine. Something to think about. And Scott's trying to bring that up because that's not native. And so non-native, you'll see this in Christmas tree plantations. That is kind of a heartburn to our health specialists. They hate seeing these abandoned Christmas tree plantations, because what happens is they plant all these trees that people like for Christmas trees, but they're not native, and it's just like an infestation of diseases and insects. So, like, you know, the Colorado blue spruce, everybody thinks that's an awesome looking tree. I get it, I do. And I have a lot of landowners, it grows great, and then all of a sudden it just dies.
It just doesn't, even though Colorado gets snow, it's cold, but they're dry and we're moist, so that's the difference. Red oak, white oak, bur oak. Bur oak and white oak are ones that are really good, that can handle a lot of that different types of variation of moisture. Red oak needs fertile soil. It just doesn't do as well. So you can pick probably bur oak for the sandier sites if you want. White oak tends to be versatile, I've seen, but they do like fertile soil. Like an example, tamarack. Everyone thinks tamarack needs to grow in wet, moist, swampy areas, because that's where we find it. But actually, tamarack, if you plant it in fertile soil in upland, it does great. The reason why you find them always in the wetlands is because they don't have to compete with other species. So that's why they're found in wetlands. So that doesn't mean, so trees don't like growing in wetness, just some can handle it better than others. I think that covers it. White cedar, we don't have a lot of white cedar in this area. That's my favorite tree. It's also the favorite tree once a deer discovers it. It's like candy to them. I love it. I've got some white cedar growing. It's an awesome tree. But if they discover it, I have a landowner. Every time I went to go visit him, he has the most beautiful cedar growing in his yard. And he has deer everywhere. I'm like, how is the cedar not eating it? And they're 30 feet tall. And then I went to go visit him because he was into wood carving. I always like to go look at his products. And I went there and all the white cedar, all the way up to 30 feet, were all gone. I'm like, how did the deer get to that? He actually has video of this deer pushing the tree over, the other tree eating the top, and he was eating the other side. So once they discover it, be prepared, they're gonna eat all your white cedar. It is literally candy. But I'm not saying not to plant it. Like I said, I still agree with planting oak. I think we're gonna have to deal with all these issues out there in the forest. We're just gonna have to work with it. White pine has white pine blisterus. It's an awesome tree though. It's native. That was one of our first species that was really covered in Wisconsin when the pine barrens came in here to put all those white pine down. And you can see that's invading fields and you think, well, deer won't eat those. I swear the deer can smell a planted tree miles away compared to a natural seeded tree. So. These are just some lists of species to think about. You know, speaking of this, I'll pass this out. I didn't have enough copies, so I didn't bring it. You can actually find this on the DNR website, and actually it's a really good resource to look at different photos of the trees that they sell at the nursery. So I'll pass this out. It is a really neat resource. So you can print this out yourself. I do have some copies. They don't print them anymore from DNR. I don't know why, but probably because you can print them. So here you go. To pass that around, and it's the DNR website. You just type in DNR, Wisconsin DNR, and you can type in tree planting, and you should be able to find it. If you can't find it, give me a call. Like I said, wet soils, it kind of covered that. You know, tamarack likes to grow in wet soils because it doesn't have to outcompete other species. Same thing with, you look at sugar maple and red maples. Red maples can handle the wetter soils. Sugar maples like the more fertile soil. You'll still find both species, but you'll find more sugar maples in the upland and more fertile soils because they outcompete the red maple a lot of times. Yeah, we can go on. That's me. I actually took notes because I don't want to forget to tell you guys stuff. Site prep is a big thing. It really is. I get landowners calling me, I want to plant this spring, and they call me in February. And I'm like, no. You want to do a little bit of planning, like was mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. And some of the plantings you want to consider is mechanical, chemical, and cover crops. I honestly have never done anything with cover crops, but I think it is a possibility to think about. Like I said, I was having a conversation with the retired forester that used to work in Barron, Dennis Waterman, And this other landowner, he actually had a whole bunch of hardwood surviving on his grant. And, they were arguing back and forth why. And because deer like eat it, and he says, well, it's by the road, there's no other trees around it, so the deer didn't go after it. And he goes, the landowner goes, nope. The year before these trees were planted, because he bought this land beforehand, he knows the history. The year before it was planted, he was signing up for a program to plant it, get a grant, but he didn't think he got it, so he was mad. So he decided to take all his turkey food and spread it on that property. And it was thick. And it was just loaded the whole property. And then they got the grant and he planted that spring. And the hardwoods grew like crazy. So the theory is the fertilizer really doesn't affect conifers. So I learned this actually today. Doesn't affect conifers, but the fertilizer really did help those hardwoods. So it was interesting to see. Now, it could be multiple issues that created such a great hardwood plantation, but those are some things to think about. Cover crops, if you plant like a leaf, I'm sorry, I'm not very good at saying words. Legumes, you know what I'm talking about, beans. They add nitrogen back into the soil. So that's an option. I had a farmer I hiked with him, and he's been doing cover crops for planting for corn. And he's been studying this over the years, and he is amazed how his productivity is increasing substantially by using certain cover crops in the fall. And it does weed control, it doesn't have to use herbicides, and it's working for him. I'm thinking this is something that we could, I think we should start looking into more. You're wondering about mechanical cyclop. Some landowners I've dealt with that had the 2017 tornado or the 2019 tornado, the county forest has, we've had to timber harvest, get all that timber off of there, and then we have to cyclop it. And you're thinking, well, how do you go through all that slash that's left over there? We actually have a company that came in and has a huge tractor tires, big machinery, and he converted it so that he could have a sprayer in the back, boom spray, and he jumps right over the stumps, all over the down trees and everything, goes right through there, and then in the fall, we spray it. And then you got a hand plant. So that's one way of, another thing mechanically to think about cyclop, and was mentioned earlier, is you got to think about the edge. A lot of times they tell landowners to cut those box elder trees down. It's a native tree, I'm not against them, but they do outcompete trees that you're planting and the ones that you want to grow. Chemicals, simply like I was saying, spraying. Like if you have a buckthorn issue, invasive species, or grass dot, I do not recommend ever rototilling a field to plant trees. If you have sod growing, leave the sod sprayed or mow it. Do not rototill it. What happens is when you disturb the soil, what happens is it creates an opening for those weeds that are in that soil, because those seeds can last for years, and then you expose them, and then they start to grow and cause some more issues. On top of that, I've had a landowner who did that. The best type of field to plant into is like a cornfield or a bean field. The farmer already took care of it, he's done all the spraying, you don't have to do any site prep. Well, I had a landowner who decided just to plow it, he wanted to look nice, yeah, I get it, plowed fields, kind of neat. But in actuality, that creates more issues when you want to come there in the spring, if you're using a tree planting machine, it's fluffy soil. If that tree planting machine can't compact that soil to get that tree planted in. So it makes it a more muddy, icky mess. So do not rototill the field.
Did it go?
No.
Ooh, what did I do? There we go. Okay, so this is an example of spraying, and you can see it's a sod field, and they sprayed strips. That was another thing I learned today. I was talking to that landowner today, and I actually helped him in Polk County when I used to work in Polk County. We did that on one of his fields, and he would never do that again. You know, it seems like this would be an ideal situation because you're using less chemical. But in actuality, what happened is they did this, and then the contractor that was hired to plant the trees, you know, you're supposed to go down the middle of the row. because this is killed, that's site prep for that tree to get established there. Well, the contractor was lazy or something, and he kind of missed, and he went into the green part, and it just didn't work. And the other thing I was listening to somebody else talk about that, what that does create is the green part, if you don't mow that then, and it gets super tall in the fall, it creates this really nice little bed for your moles and voles, and then you create this nice little feeding trough for those things to eat the bark and kill all your trees. So I think it's best to probably site prep the whole field if you wanted to. I mean, you can do this, but then I would recommend mowing in between, and I do recommend mowing in between. But that's beyond site prep. So, yep. I think I covered everything on that. If you go to the next slide. So this talks about when to spray, when to do site prep. Ideally, it's done in the fall. That's why I plant.
But I also have a husband that has equipment and has sprayed right over the fields.
Later on. You can spray it later, but we only planted conifers. You can spray right over them once the tree buds have set. So like end of August, I kind of want to wait till September just to make sure, but you can spray Roundup right over a pine tree and not kill it in the end of August. As long as it's set and not dry, because Roundup only kills actively growing plants. So you can do that, and it worked for me. So you don't actually have to, but if you're gonna be planting hundreds of trees, wouldn't you want to start out the right way and get it done? At least give some help to those trees. I've had landowners one year in Polk County, we did the site prep, it was nicely mowed, and then the next year we hit a drought. And you know, he was gonna mow in between, and I called him up and said, don't mow. The reason why I said not to mow is I wanted that grass can actually take moisture away from the trees, but at the same time, it can provide shade. And it was a very hot, dry summer. So there are incidents this is not all set in stone. I've had landowners that don't want to do chemical whatsoever, so we find out a different way. We mow, we do a little bit more work that way. But yeah, typically, if you saw that tree planting plan that went through, it tells you the site prep. And the site prep is, if it's grass like this, you mow it mid-August, wait 4 weeks, 6 weeks, something like that, 4 weeks, wait till that grass is about 6 inches long, and then you take Roundup and you spray it. And that will kill it. If you have other weed issues, there's other chemicals out there. If you want to be extra cautious, there's pre-emergence. So you spray, you can mix the Roundup with a pre-emergent spray. And that what that does is it sits in the soil and it prevents those weeds from coming up in the spring. It's kind of like, you ever have a vegetable garden, I forgot the name of the green, yeah, exactly. So similar to that. I don't generally recommend that often because I don't see that much of an issue. We'd have to keep an eye on it. So this is talking about what to buy. So if you order from the state nursery, you would buy bare root. You can buy containerized, or you can buy actually the seed, like an acorn, and put it in the ground too. There's two options. Bare root, what it is, I think let me just check. I think the next slide shows you, no it doesn't. So bare root essentially is a tree with just the roots, and there's no dirt attached to it. Containerized, it comes in a plug and there's still dirt attached. And then direct seed is the seed. Containerized actually is the ideal best way to do it. We've been finding it out on county forest. Polk County, actually the county forest over there, they actually, when I was working over there, we collect the seed, send it to a company in Minnesota or Canada. They would grow that exact seed, and it would be in a container, and they would ship it back to Polk County in the spring, and they would plant the containerized stock, and they'd get a better success rate. Very expensive. I don't recommend that because of the cost. But that's kind of, they've been finding out, especially for jack pine, because that is a hard one to grow. That's what they've been doing. Bare root does work. We've had a few years, let's say the trees came in and I looked at them, we opened the box, you called me up and said, this doesn't look right, these trees just don't look healthy. Well, then I'll come out there, we'll take some pictures. And let's say they don't survive, the DNR does replace trees that don't grow. If there's just, if you planted them correctly and you did everything correctly, they will replace them for free. But we gotta have some communication. Direct seeding, I have not officially done that myself. I did right before I came to Barron, I was having a landowner gonna do it. I never got to do it, so Forester and Polk County did it. But here in Barron County, we do have a spot in Vance Creek where the county forester did do that with an acorn planter, and it worked out great. Tons of oaks coming, the whole thing.
Kind of planter.
It's an acorn planter?
What is that?
Honestly, I don't know, and unfortunately, we don't have it here in Barron County, and I don't know where it is anymore. Unfortunately, because Barron County did buy it, and then, ended up sending it to Baldwin, I'd have to find it. I think it just puts, it's like a seed planter, and it just plants it right into the ground.
Hand operator?
A tractor,
Okay.
yep,
Is it like a drill?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So, and it, I don't remember, it's 5 or 10 acres down, I don't know if you guys know, Van, so there's if you guys wanna know, I can show you on a map afterwards, if you want to, I can point that out, and you guys can go look at it, it's really neat. There's actually a fishing pier right there, you guys will fishing.
There is a hand planter, forestry suppliers, it's called the squirrel acorn planter. So if you're interested in doing that by hand, that is an option.
Yeah, so, and then, stock type. What this is saying is the DNR nursery, they have 3-year-olds, 2-year-olds, and 1-year-olds. Essentially the 3-year-olds are, because when they grow them, and they actually cut the tops off. You can mow trees right down and they'll come right back. And, that's what they do. And then they'll get this huge root system. So when you want to plant, let's say oaks or hardwoods, I do not recommend 3-year-olds. Seems like, oh, I want the older tree. No, the root systems are just way too big and you won't get them in the ground. You'll be very miserable. So I would stick to the 1-year-olds or 2-year-olds. Now, white pine and white spruce, their root system's a little bit different and their tops are a lot smaller. So I'd probably stick with either 2-year-olds or 3-year-olds. You'd be fine with that. And there are actually pictures, and I don't know, they actually on the DNR website, they actually have pictures of the different sizes of the trees.
Oh, Dave can go to the next slide.
Like I said, plan ahead, don't wait till the last minute to plant trees, but it can be done, so I'm not saying don't do it, I get it. I have a lot of landowners that have done it, it's just that you're gonna have to do some, like, we had to mow our, spray our trees for 2 years, and then they took off. Well, they would have been a lot bigger if the highway department didn't mow them off, but they did come back. And so, make a plan, like I send around, I can do that for you, you can make your own plan, have that website that can help you think that through. And order your trees. I have landowners call me all the time, I wanna order trees, and if you don't think you can remember, I do have a file every year I have on my desk. And I write down your name, whether you want an email or you want that sheet of paper mailed to you, I'll do that. And every year I write down when they want it. So if you want somebody else to remember for you, I can do that for you. And you start ordering in October, the beginning of October. Do not wait. They sell out very, very fast. We used to have 3 nurseries in Wisconsin, now we only have 2. So they sell out very fast. For the next step. this is just when you get your trees, how to store them. Keep them in a cold temperature. I tell landowners, I've had landowners that create put an air conditioner attached to the garage, insulate the garage, and they were really into it, and that works great. But if you have a barn or a pole shed, they tend to be cold. Just don't store them too long, try to get them in the ground. They get delivered at the end of April. There's been a very few times that I've had to extend it because of the snow, that went into May. But typically it's the last 2 weeks of April when they get delivered here in Barron, and then you can come and pick them up. So if you're gonna be planting trees, leave those weeks open. I can't tell you, someone just asked me, when are they getting delivered? I still don't know. We still have snow, so we can't plant them anyways, but that's probably the time. Unless something majorly changes. The other thing is you get the boxes, when you get the trees from the state nursery, they're about this big. You can put them in the back of your truck really easily. They're in plastic. They ask me, should you water them, soak them with water? Don't. If it's already moist, leave them alone, keep it shut. You don't want to rot them. So whatever's in there, just leave them be. If you order big trees and you're in it, I've seen a lot of contractors, what contractors do is you can prune your trees, the roots. You think you're gonna hurt them. You can actually do it. You just take a block and a axe and you can cut them off. It's really easy. So if you order trees and they come to the state nursery, we can take a tree out and I can show you how to do it. We can do the next slide. It shows you. So essentially shows you the pruning. Obviously, that's kind of obvious. You don't want to do that. That brings up another point though. When you order from the state nursery, there's two options. You could buy graded or bulk. Bulk is cheaper because what they do is they take a tractor and lift all these trees up and you get this big group of trees. They're not graded to the best. And so then you might get trees like that out of there. They might not have the best root system. They're kind of crammed in there. When they're graded, they have a group of people down at the nurseries and they sort and give you the best trees and they count which trees you get. Contractors like graded, and I find out landowners do too. But if you get bulk, you can try planting them all and see if they survive. But generally they don't do so well. You can see that the hardwood up there, those are big root systems. So, I mean, if you're using a tree planting machine and trying to plant that into a little hole and trying to plant a whole bunch, you're not gonna want a big root system like that. And something to point out with this tree here, you don't want to plant anywhere higher than this. So generally I tell landowners don't bury the needles, but you can see there's needles down below here. So you make sure you don't want to bury the needles. That will hurt the tree and it won't survive. Hardwoods, if the root systems are not that big, they're an easy tree to plant. You just want to make sure you plant them deep. It's like a tomato plant. If you're planting tomatoes and it's spirally, you can plant that thing all the way down to the last leaf and it will still grow. Hardwoods are very similar to that. They don't mind being planted that deep. Yeah, I don't know. You can do this if you want. But my opinion is I wouldn't. Some people say, well, should I soak them in water, in a bucket of water? When you go out to the field, have a bucket of water. And if you're using a tree planting machine, I would recommend at least one person on the tractor, one person on the tree planting machine, and then one person to follow behind and another person prepping the trees to get them on that planter. And the person that's prepping the trees could be pruning the roots or dipping them in the water, but you don't want to store them in water. So I wouldn't do any of the prep in the shed. I would think there's gotta be shade somewhere, or if it's a little bit of sun for a few minutes, that's not gonna hurt it, especially if it's a really wet or dry, windy day, maybe. But typically our springs are wet, so I wouldn't worry about it. All right. So this kind of gives you a time frame of how long it will take you to plant trees. By hand, I could plant 500 trees. 1,000 trees are probably more so the professional hand planters. Or they actually plant way more than that. And then if you have, planting with a machine, I would guess around 5,000. The one person that you hire custom planters, they can plant about 8,000 trees in a day. Because they know how to work that machine. You could go up and down, and by the time you get down, let's say you're only planting 2,000 trees, by the time you get to 2,000, you finally figured out the planting machine. So typically, you can rent a machine, but if you only have 2,000 trees, it might go faster, you have a lot of people out there helping you with the spade. So are you guys asking where do you get a tree planting machine? You're like, if you hear me talking, has anyone planted trees with a machine?
We
Yeah.
used one from
county?
the county.
Yeah. Okay,
And made a nice little furrow behind the tractor and a person was sitting there and dropping them. It took a couple of us.
yeah,
And you're right, to dip it in water and then one person filled in. It was
you could pass.
a process.
Pass it down. Yeah, exactly. So this is a sheet that has the different custom planter, if you want to rent a machine. This is like a sheet I hand out, let's say you order, you can pass one, oh, sorry. I can put that on. It gives you ideas of if you want to hire somebody, if you want to rent a machine, be aware, a yard tractor is not gonna pull that machine. You need a tractor that can pull a plow, essentially, so keep that in mind. Okay. I think it's a funny photo. If you're gonna be planting 1,000 trees, are you gonna take that much effort? I don't think so. But it is a good point, though. You wanna make sure those roots are under the ground. I've been there. That's why, you're asking why you have somebody walking behind the tree planting machine. It's always good because that person that's in the machine may not be getting in the ground, it may not be pushed out. So it's always nice to have somebody walk behind, grab that tree, stomp it in, just to make sure. If it's looking good, then you don't have to do much work. But it's always good to walk behind. You're spending that money, you're spending all this effort, you want to plant it good. So essentially, the machine does it all. If you do, so you're asking, well, I don't want to do a machine. There is an option where you can rent spades. And, here's an example of using a spade, and actually the county, you can check them out. I don't know how they do it, you have to ask. You check them out. I think you give them some money and they give you your money back once you turn them in. It's just a nice handy spade to do. So if you have few trees that you want to plant, and it shows you an example of how to do it.
Where do you get that?
The county. So that sheet that I handed out at the first for renting the machine, the planter, it says that, the same person, you want to call them.
If you have a blacksmith in the area, they can make this for about $25 plus materials.
Yeah, they're not, you need to buy them, yeah. But yeah, the county already has them too, so. Yeah, very true. Okay. So this is just key points of what I just talked about. And a lot of times when people pick up the tree, they're pointed out, keep them in a cool spot. You're gonna have best survival if you do it right first time. Some things in monitoring and, some of the things they had on here, utility clock, I don't recommend going out there and doing all the math, figuring out how many trees survive. I think you, can easily visualize what's going on out there, but if you want to know more, I could come out there and we could take some plots to figure out how many more trees you need to plant. Usually you want to replant within the first 3 years, because those trees can catch up. But after that, then it's kind of, you may not be able to catch up to that. So one of the things you want to keep an eye on, is what's killing your trees? Was it planted correctly? Is it the weeds? Is there animals out there? So I mentioned that. You asked what kind of species to plant, oaks, deer like to eat them. Deer like to eat white pine. So a way to avoid, you can pass one, if whoever wants one. You can plant white pine, but this is a really easy method to survive your trees. It's called the bud capping. You take a piece of paper in the fall, staple it on, and it will stop the deer from eating the tops. The county forest does it all over. I have not personally done it, but I've talked to many people and it's worked. We are actually debating whether we're gonna hire somebody to do that on the county forest, because we're planting white pine this spring. And there's a lot of deer in different parts of the county, and where we're planting, there's a lot of deer. So that might help. And it's a cheap method, just grab a whole bunch of paper and staple it on. So even though deer like to eat white pine, this might help them survive. If you wanna plant oak and they're not surviving, I think the next slide actually. Oh, we'll just go to the next slide and then I'll get into more of this. Herbicides and mowing, like I said, you wanna mow probably the first 3 years, if you can. It's not absolutely necessary. I've seen the tree survive without doing it, but if you can, it gives them a little bit extra boost. Now, if there's a drought and other situations, I've actually, the nursery sent up monitoring team from the nursery down south to look at these fields, and they told the landowner he needed to spray. And the landowner freaked out because he talked to me, I told him not to. And I went out there again to look at it. His weeds weren't that bad. If you look from the road, so I'm thinking these people that were hired, they just looked from their car. But if you walk out there, it wasn't grass, it was a whole bunch of herbaceous plants. And they weren't gonna hurt the tree. You could see the tree was well open. It just looked like it was really deep. But when you walked in there, it was very sparse. So it's good to walk in there and see what's going on. Grasses can, reed canary grass can get really tall and knock the trees down. Those are the kind of things we need to watch out for. But mowing, I think, will do just fine. Herbicide, it depends on how fast the trees are growing, and you fell behind the schedule and it's not working. If you did not plant hardwoods, you can spray over. You cannot spray over hardwoods. I don't know if there's any spray out there. There might be. I'd have to do some research.
Say that again.
Spraying over hardwoods. So if you planted oaks, you can't spray over them unless it's a certain herbicide, and if it's gonna affect maybe grasses only, I would have to do some research on what herbicide you can.
But you can spray over, conifers.
Yeah. A lot easier.
Is there a spray that would, deter deer? That you
Yes.
spray?
Yeah, that's actually, why don't we get to that slide? That one's more fun.
Next one.
Yeah, the next slide is lot better. So, yeah, you can see the different options for deer, because deer is a big issue. So I actually, last 2 years ago, I had a landowner, he was planting all oaks, and he's planted in an area where there's a lot of deer. And it will be interesting to see how they survive, because at one time he was gonna do a fence, then he looked into the cost, it's very expensive, but it's worth it. And then he was looking into these tubes, and I thought, this is an ideal situation. And then I started doing research, and we have a lot of specialists in the DNR, so I call around and I said, what do you think of these tubes? No, don't do it. It's not worth it. What happens, and I've seen this, well, for one thing, the trees get weak. So that it's a microclimate, it's warmer in those tubes, and so they get weak. So they're not having the wind hit them. That's what, if you notice that if there's no wind hitting, if you're planting seedlings and you don't have that fan on your seedlings growing, they're not gonna survive in your garden. So they need the wind. At the same time, I was on this plantation that had it, the mice really like it. They created nice little homes in each of them, and then they had the little food to eat of the tree. So that was a negative. So I don't recommend that. I would go the extra route and do the fence if you want to. There are repellents, and I did research on it, and it does work. But the problem is, you have to spray it every year, and there's some repellents that last throughout rain. but you still have to spray it at the end of the year, so it's like 3 or 4 months. And it can only handle so many rains, you have to do the research, and I did find some, so if you want to do repellents, I can help do the research too again and give you some advice. I did call the nursery, they had some good suggestions on what to use, but it does work. But it's a constant thing until you get those trees above the deer. So. Yep, and then bug capping, there's a picture that I sent you around, if you wanna do white pine, that does work. Netting, I don't know much about that, I can see the deer pushing that down pretty easily, they're pretty aggressive. Any questions on that? I do have costs, I didn't bring that with, what it kind of costs to do fences, because they have been doing that in other parts of Wisconsin, over in Shawano County. Wapaka County, the deer are so bad there, they can't even grow sugar maple in a wood, so they have to fence off a lot of areas if they want to grow certain trees. They're having a big problem over there, so they do put fences up. Another option, if you want to do a small little area, you know, deer don't like jumping into small little areas, so you could just do a little small fence, and they typically don't like jumping in those areas, so you could do small plantings. Any questions about that?
Just one thing, just tell people, I planted like 250 just oaks, just with acorns, really beautiful. And, first year they did really well, I did them in the spring, I picked them up. And the doggone rabbits one, I just had a small area, I planted like 250 rabbits, ate every single one of them off, for winter.
Yeah.
But then they came back, then I put a wire fence around it, something to ground them, but now this year I hope I'm gonna transplant them, so.
Yeah, that's a good point, rabbits. That happened once in a plantain, it was about an acre plantation, and the rabbits destroyed every single oak. Yes, that is the positive thing, though, like I said, if they get mowed off, the oaks will keep coming back. It's just that the thing is you wanna get those above the deer. So, I mean, don't get devastated if the deer wipe them out the first year, they're okay. If they're growing, the roots should be fine. So get above there, we're gonna figure out a method, maybe spraying them or repellent or something. So.
Although Leopold wrote about that in the St. County Almanac. You could tell the rabbit population by when you harvested the wood, you could see when the population was high. And it was, I don't know, a 3-4 year cycle, because typically the rabbits came in and then the fox came in and wiped the rabbits out, and then trees grew. And you'd see another rabbit spike, and it's interesting reading.
Do you leave the bud caps, just leave them? You take them off after 2 or 3 years, or you let them deteriorate, or what do you do?
They can be great, it's a paper. So they can be gone by the spring or most of them, you know, with the wind, the snow and the wetness and everything. The question is, and I remember when to do it, that is a debatable situation. Some people say do it, there's this time period when to do it. I would say do it more in the fall, because the deer have plenty to eat. They typically should not be going after it. You don't want to do it too soon, because if you do it too soon, wind and other issues could take it off or whatever. So typically fall. I would say around September, October, when things are getting, you can get out there.
Is it typically 1 year enough, or do you do, it's gonna have to be 2 or 3 years, or?
That is a good question. I think
You
what's the
get like
recommend?
6, 7, 8 foot tall, you don't.
I think it just you might have to do it 2 or 3 years, depending on what's going on out there. Monitor it.
Was it just a paper towel?
It's just a piece of paper like this. You just take this piece of paper, you staple it twice. You put it around the main terminal thing. I can do some more research on that if you guys are interested in actually doing that and want to do that. I'll call Bayfield County, because the county forest up there does it. And ask them again how often they do it and how many times they should do it, because they have very good success with it. And they've done it different times of the year, and they found this time period that works.
Would it work with, hemlock or cedar?
typically, when deer eat a white pine, they eat the terminal, because that's the tender part of it. I've seen with cedar, white cedar, they just eat everything.
Yeah, right.
So I don't know if that would work with the white cedar. I don't think so. I think they would just, they eat down below and just push it off, because, yeah, when they eat the white pine, they eat the tender part of it. And they typically eat that in the spring, you know, when, you know, that's because they're starting to grow and that tender part's coming up, so that's kind of why we want to keep them on there late fall, and then they survive throughout the time. Red pine, you don't eat that. They don't eat the red pine. I mean, you will occasionally see that. I've seen it in Polk County where the population of deer is pretty bad, and they wiped out a whole red pine plantation. So it does happen, but it's very rare. White spruce, I wouldn't worry about it either, so I wouldn't even do it on that, because they don't eat that either. You'll get occasionally, they'll nibble on it, and they realize it's not that good. Unless the population's really, really out of control, then you might have an issue beyond just trying to save those few trees. The biggest issue you'll have later on in life that I've seen, the bucks rubbing your trees and killing them that way, and I don't have a solution with that.
Shoot.
Should go. Yeah, that is a solution. This is pretty much the end. I'm pretty sure. One of the things I brought along that I created over the years is kind of gives you an estimated cost, what it costs to plant trees. With the tornadoes, I've dealt with this a lot, with people planting in situations like that, I've dealt with people planting in cornfields, which are, you know, it's an easy situation, or grass fields, those are easy situations. So this covers a lot of that. Like I said at the beginning, if you want to plant trees and you want some more advice, you need to call this summer, we can take a hike. So you can look at different things and use my group, if not, or the trees, but this gives you a starting point too.
Has anyone gets into final amendment? Or fertilizer?
Like I said, you know, like the guy, I told you, the landowner, the farmers put all that food out there and worked for his hardwood, that's what he claims. Or planting a cover crop, like I said, I think that's a good way to start it, like planting rye. Is an option because of the weed control. The problem with that is humans like things right now. And you gotta have patience, you gotta plant that cover crop, and how long should you plant it? That is the question, so you probably would have to do a little bit more work and get your soil tested, see what is missing in your soils.
What are the recommendations on each species?
Fertilizer, like I said, no. No, we don't, and even yard trees, we don't fertilize very often. You know, most of the time fertilizers is a salt compound, and so it takes moisture. So if you fertilize your yard tree, you wanna make sure you well water it afterwards. Same with the vegetable garden, if you plant, you know, you can have a time release fertilizer, and I don't know if there's such a thing for trees. That's why I would stick with native trees. They tend to do really good in this area. So let's say clay soils, you wanna plant white pine, not red pine. I did, but I'm sure they won't survive very long. I do a lot of stuff just to watch it, what happens to it. So red pine like sandier soil, so infertile. Tamarack, an example, they like wetter soil, so they can handle a lot of different varieties of soils, but they don't like sandy soil. But they can grow in clay soil and uplands. If you notice, if you plant a red maple or a sugar maple in your yard, they'll get cracks. Well, those are shade tolerant species. So they like to grow in shade, so when you plant them in the open, they'll crack more often. So ideally, in an ideal situation, you would want to plant those more in a shaded area. But because you're getting these trees from a nursery, you think about where you're getting them from, they're baby. they're taking care of, they're grown in the open, so if you grab them and then put them in complete shade, they're not gonna do so well. So I have a lot of landowners say, well, I just had this timber harvest, should I plant trees? I say no. Let's see what nature does. Nature does way better. I like tree planting, I'm all for it, but if I had the choice, I would want nature to do its course. I even had landowners where aspen, when you cut an aspen tree, all the roots shoot up new aspen trees. So if they're on the edge of a field and he wants that to be trees, let's just cut those aspen, even if they're not ready to be cut, let's cut them. And then don't mow that field, let those trees grow, and that comes up naturally. So there's ways that you can get things to work. What I've been seeing too, is oak. You can't get the oak to grow, but what we've been seeing over the years in these red pine plantations, oaks are growing really awesome in under red pine. Why, we do not know. So what I've been doing in some of the stands in one of the county red pine, like I said, if it's planted in a fertile soil and clay, they start to decline at 30, and we've been seeing that pocket decline. Even though it wasn't destroyed by the tornado, I had the logger cut this one part of this pine plantation down because I saw lots of regeneration in the understory of hardwoods. So I took the red pine off, and I'm hoping that will come back. And we've been seeing that it's kind of a comical thing for us to say, if you want oaks to grow, plant red pine. So,
What are your thoughts on cottonwood? I'm curious about those things. They're such a big tree.
it's a good, it's a neat tree. I would want it. I am growing like crazy and I'm cutting them down like crazy on my property because the neighbor has a cottonwood that the seeds fly to my property. They're a nuisance. If you have enough of them, you'll have them all over the place in your yard. The seeds, and then if they have a prolific year, you'll have that cotton all over the place. And for timber wise, there's no use for it. It's not even good for firewood. So that's how I look at
I
it.
just think, yeah, as far as I know, they're hard to kill.
Yes, they are.
I mean, if you want to treat
It's the fastest growing tree I've ever seen. So, yeah, I blink and they're 10 feet tall.
Yeah.
We ran a veneer mill in Cameron and we used cottonwood for years.
Really?
Yes. Extremely good grading veneer.
Huh.
Yeah.
It just seems like
And
such
they
a
all
light wood.
died, when we went to cottonwood.
Oh, interesting. That is interesting. Well,
Cheap. It was cheap.
cheap wood. Yeah, well, maybe with all these other issues going on in our forest. Like I said, it does seem like doomsday with the ash. I used to tell landowners, don't cut your ash. You never know, you might have that one ash that could survive that emerald ash borer. Everyone gets disappointed with the amount of buckthorn that's out there these days, but I think don't worry about it. The trees are doing fine. Let's just focus on where we want to focus. It's not the end of the world. And I just, buckthorns everywhere, invasives are everywhere. We're just gonna have to deal with it. There's deer are everywhere. We're never gonna get rid of the deer. And weather. I mean, we can't control the weather no matter what we want to try to do. We can't. And it's gonna be, some years it's gonna be wet, some years it's gonna be really dry. I know in Polk County, when I first started there in the 1980s, there was a drought. Now, I don't know if you guys remember the drought in the 1980s, you pretty much shoot fireworks off in Wisconsin. And a whole bunch of people planted trees that spring, and they thought these trees were not gonna survive. They did, quite a few of them did. So it's amazing how resilient trees are. So, but it is a big investment, so I do recommend some site prep, some thought goes into it, and if you need help, just give me a holler.
I've got a question about red pine.
Yeah.
I moved into a neighborhood, I think it was started like 30 years ago, where they planted like red pine everywhere. The trees are probably all like 50 feet tall and like, they just look like toothpicks, like the crown of the trees, like at the very top, or like, I guess like a lion tip tail. Is that normal for that type of tree? 'Cause I know a bunch of them, I don't know if they cut them down at some point, I don't know if a disease or
They had
bug.
a disease that came through.
Something went through, I know, before I moved in, the old neighborhood had a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, that is a good question. We tell people to plant trees, but then, okay, what happens in the future? Well, typically, if you're planting pine trees, red pine or white pine and stuff, the typical plan is about 25 to 30 years you want to thin them. So when people plant these red pines, like he's saying, people will plant them and then they don't do anything, and 50 years later, these trees don't stop growing. They just don't get big. They turn into toothpicks and just get like this. And you'll see that in a lot of areas where these trees are super tall and really compact in this area because they were never thin. And then you have an issue. Can you get them thin? There's a slight chance you can, but if you wait too long, no. So that's another thing to consider. And I've been seeing an issue. Previous foresters were ambitious with tree planting, and they planted a 5-acre field here and a 2-acre field here, and then the landowners are calling me now, what do I do? I don't have a solution. They're gonna have to go out there and cut them themselves, within them. So keep that in mind. If you wanna do that, you might be thinning them yourself, because unless you have other land, you can get the logger in there. So, I mean, those are some things to think about. So you wanna thin these pine plantations around 30 years. That's a very good question.
Yeah, they call it Pine Place. They built it, you know, they landscaped the lots around the pine trees they had planted, but it's a disaster now. Like you say, they're like tall toothpicks that are really pretty volatile to wind and.
Yep. They're very weak. They're not that strong base. They would have been thin. So yeah, there's more to it. And I'll say it again, we can get to that point 30 years from now, follow the forester. Hopefully it's not me. And then- And you know, if you have a property or you buy a property that has a pine plantation on it, we can take a hike. There have been issues with pine, you know, with diseases, with the hail that we got in 2019, that brings in diseases, so that's another issue that we need to deal with.
Now, you mentioned that buckthorn. Was it you who came up with forestry? We have property kind of on the edge of Rice Lake, on the lake property there, and it is an old woods. I mean, it's really old. We had them looking at the oak wilt.
Was it? Yeah, that was last
okay,
summer.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I bought a buckthorn type apparatus thing that I see that they were selling that kind of digs in, and then you lever it back. It's got a big handle, you lever back. So I bought that for my husband for Christmas. He was really excited to see it, but I think we're gonna try to use that, but what kind of spray would work on buckthorn then?
That'd be Garland.
Garland.
Triclopyr is what you wanna look for. Garland is very expensive. There are generic versions out there. And another name would be Element, but Garland is the chemical to treat, or Triclopyr is the one that really does a good job on killing buckthorn. Triclopyr.
You just spray right on the buckthorn, or?
So there's different ways you can cut the buckthorn and then treat the stump. But if you do that, you remember the active growing part of a tree is only the outer layer, small little ring. So the smaller the tree, the less chemical getting in. So the smaller the tree, I do not recommend stump treating. I've done it, it doesn't work that well. So what you want to do, depending on how bad you have it, you can cut them off. Let's say in the winter months, you're ambitious, it's cooler out, and there's not as much snow, hopefully someday, and you can go out there and just cut them off. And what will happen, they'll sprout back 10 more, which is fine, as long as you keep that in mind and don't forget. Then in around July, August, September, go out there and foliar spray all those new sprouts. And at the same time, if you have it really infested badly, when you cut that tree, you open up the sunlight, and then you add all those little seeds that are in the ground that can germinate anytime in the next 6 years, they will sprout. So at the same time, you have this backpack sprayer on, you're spraying the sprouts from the stump, you're also spraying that new seed that's growing. So in actuality, you're killing 2 years worth of growth at once. That's one way of doing it. Another method is you have the backpack sprayer on and you can basal spray it. All you do is you add surfactant that connects to the bark, and you just want to spray around the base of it about this high up, all the way around, all the way to the base. and that will kill it.
It's the same product, but you have to add.
Yeah, you read the directions on the label, yes, what you need to mix and the concentration.
I think it's 1 part, 3 parts diesel.
Yep, yep, you can use diesel, seed oil. Seed oil is better for the environment. Diesel typically is cheaper. I don't know anymore these days, but, I use diesel because I can't afford seed oil. And just, so you know, it is really smelly and it will stink for like 6 months. It does not scare the deer away. So if you want to bow hunt and you want the deer to get used to you not knowing you're there, spray the buckthorn and they'll just walk through and they won't even smell you because the diesel's
What is the additive?
diesel fuel
Oh, diesel fuel.
or seed oil. Seed oil is better for the environment. Diesel fuel is cheaper. So it's up to you what you want to do. Or it could be, seed oil could be cheaper. I don't know anymore these days. Double check on that one. But yeah, that's another option too, you know, when you say, take a hike through your woods, we can point out buckthorn like we did out on your property, oak wilt. Oak wilt is spreading throughout Barron County, which I figured because of the 2017 tornado. When did that hit? That was in May 17th, 2017, I'll never forget. And that is a time period where you don't want to prune your oaks, you don't want to do any harvesting between April 15th through July 15th, because that's when the beetle spreads, the oak wilt. And when you have a tornado, it breaks branches off, and that beetle is attracted to that sap, and that carries the disease right on its legs, and then if it's in your stand, then it spreads throughout. But it's not the end. We can figure out options. So I've had landowners, we're gonna have to maybe cut some more trees, stuff like that, but we can maybe stop it.
You talked a lot about what I interpret as production type of planting or large scale. I've got really heavy clay soil. And I don't plant hundreds of trees. I plant more for specimens. And what do you recommend for amending heavy clay soil for a specimen tree versus production? If you want to plant another variety, I think you've only really talked about white pine and clay.
Tamaracks, deer don't eat tamarack, but they rub them.
They'll grow in clay.
Oh, yeah, I've got a couple. Yeah, and we're clay based. And actually, they're not a real pretty tree. I never thought they were. But I love them now. I mean, they're soft. It's a beautiful tree.
Oh, I really like.
Yeah, yeah, they're interesting and mine, it's clay based. And both of them are doing well.
Clay and you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, typically you find them in marshes, but they like uplands.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, historically, people used to love to build log cabins out of tamarack because they were upland trees. And they are just dead, they tend to be dead straight.
Pierce County, I used to work down in Pierce County for the DNR, and there's a ton of tamarack plantations down there. So it can be done, it's beautiful, I love the tree.
I got 6-inch tamarack 12-foot posts. Over northeast for $12 a post.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was.
Something to keep in mind, because you have a lot of apples, I do not recommend, so I mentioned that I like white cedar, and it's an awesome tree, it's not a true cedar. Red cedar is a true cedar. You do not want to plant red cedar next to your apple trees, because that creates the cedar gall problem. So there's some other things you want to keep that in mind. So like even a walnut in your yard, you don't want to plant that next to your tomato plants, because that does send out chemicals. So that's something else to keep in mind. Oh, really great question. Thank you.
And walnut, you say keep that away from fruit trees as well then, huh?
Well, I don't know if they affect, I would assume so, because they shoot out the chemical, so you just kind of, you know, they don't have to be super far away, but, you know, you can't plant a tomato plant right underneath the walnut tree. They are leopathic and they give off chemicals. Grasses can grow underneath them, but other species like that don't do so well. You guys ready for the snow tomorrow? Well, the next presentation is legal issues. So be prepared. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm gonna bring up some topics that maybe you've never heard of or talked about or